Hi, you're watching Lee Jasper Drive Time. Programme this week focuses on the Metropolitan Police Service. I'll be interviewing Stafford Scott, legendary community activist, and we start a new season of Brixton Analytica with a brand new presenter, Richard Sudan. You're watching Lee Jasper Drive Time outside Scotland Yard, Victoria Embankment, London. Hi, my name's Lee Jasper. This is Brixton, South London, and you're watching Lee Jasper Drive Time.
People in the spotlight, because the time's right. Black lives matter, pump your fist for the good fight. Good people take a stand, building bridges in this land. We chop it up and conversate, and reason this is drive time. We chop it up and conversate, and reason this is drive time. Conversate, drive time.
Hi, I'm here with Stafford Scott, a campaigner much like myself of 35 years standing, who has relentlessly advocated on behalf of African, Caribbean, Asian and other ethnic minority communities in relation to human rights, civil rights abuses, particularly focused on the police. Stafford, thanks for being with us today. Stafford, what do you think is the current situation vis-a-vis the relations between African, Caribbean and Asian communities and the Metropolitan Police Service? And do you think things have got better or worse since the publication of the Macpherson report some 21 years ago?
I'm not sure if there really is a relationship between Black African and African Caribbean and Asian communities and the police, to be quite honest with you. I think that things have deteriorated so dramatically and so drastically over the last few years that no such relationship really exists. And in terms of, the second bit.
Yeah, sure. Have things got better or worse?
And in relation to whether or not things have improved or gotten worse, I mean, let's be clear, they did not improve post-Macpherson. Macpherson gave us some slim hope that things might get better, but we quickly had those hopes dismissed and denied us. Things have absolutely gotten worse since.
Why do you think the Met is still institutionally racist?
Because the police are institutionally racist. They're inherently institutionally racist. And Macpherson and the defining of institutional racism meant that we had the world's media focus on the police for a few months. And in those few months, they showed that they can control themselves when the world's focus is on them. But the moment the focus left, the moment the politicians took their eyes off of the police, what we saw was a return to the inherently institutionalized racist nature of policing that we've always seen.
Well, the Met Police Commissioner Cressida thinks the Met is not institutionally racist and thinks that our officers are acting a fair and proportionate way when policing black communities. What do you say to that?
The Commissioner is a damn blasted liar. I mean, in 2003, when she had some responsibility for eradicating institutional racism from within the Metropolitan Police Service, she's quoted as saying, "I do not believe we'll ever get rid of institutional racism." Today, that she's the commissioner who employs and is responsible for the racists, she's telling us that she doesn't think that this is a discussion that we should have and that using the term institutional racism isn't helpful. What we've seen is a ratcheting up of all of the areas of policing that leads to disproportionality. That's disproportionality in stop and search, disproportionality in the use of tasers, disproportionality in the use of violence, in the use of force, in the use of excessive force. When you hear the word disproportionality, that definitely is a sign that institutional racism is at play. There's no reason for there to be any disproportionality. She's on record as having said, for every 100 white men I stop and every 100 black men I stop, I get the same outcome. Then if you get the same outcome, Why are you stopping 1,000 black men for every 100 white men that you stop? This means that you're under policing white crime and over policing the black community. But more importantly, and she tells us what she's doing, so this racism is in our face, which she tells us, there's no hiding it, it's in plain view. She tells us that during the COVID-19 pandemic, what she's doing is policing high crime areas. The problem with that is this. The highest crime area in England happens to be the City of London, where all the banks and such are located. That's where the most crime takes place. That's where the most financial crime and high value crime takes place. But they don't police the City of London. They police white crime. That means they police criminals and criminality. When they police black crime, they police neighborhoods and boroughs. That means that anybody who happens to be black, who happens to pass through these boroughs that they've identified as high crime areas, any black person who gets caught in there, gets caught in the net, will be a suspect. Hence we get our premier athletes being caught in the net. Hence we get police officers being caught in the net. Hence we get MPs being caught in the net. This is institutional racism in action. There's no doubt about that. So I say again, Cressida Dick is a damn blasted liar.
So tell me, what do you think needs to be done in order to change the current culture of institutionalised racism within the Metropolitan Police Service?
The solution to the problem. I mean, we've been trying to find that out for decades, haven't we? At the moment, there's a discussion about defunding the police. I don't think that that's a reality in the British context, but I do think we have to reprioritise how we spend our money. So I do believe that money should be put to build a black voluntary sector that can support our young people to live up to their full potential in what is inherently a racist society. So funding some of our groups so that we engage and work with our young people instead of leaving it to the white system. I actually believe that the white system, that we should be empowered to be engaged at every single level of our children's development. I think that anything to do with race, black people have to be in the room where the decisions are made, because what we've learned is you can't leave white people in the room on their own, because institutional racism, unbiased, conscious, unwitting racism, whatever they would choose to call it, will always play a role. The police also need to be properly held to account. At the moment, they've created this process, these independent advisory groups that are not independent, that do not give advice, and they're not skilled or enabled to play the role that they're put there to do. We have to create systems that allow us to properly hold the police to account for the services that they deliver into our communities. And that means empowering black people, authentic community voices, to play a meaningful role within the process.
Interesting. Would you say that this is a crisis? And if so, how bad is it?
Okay, so I mean, I'm a child of the 80s. I grew up in the 80s, and I know how bad it used to be. Nowadays you hear people talk about how bad it used to be in the 80s. This is every bit as bad as it was in the 80s. As a matter of fact, it's even worse. We used to get arrested for sus. That was a law where ultimately the police needed no witnesses and no evidence to bring us to court and get us convicted. Today, that would be called obstructing a drug search. That's just like the sus stores. So we get young people who are stopped and searched, they're handcuffed, manacled like slaves. The police go to search them, they find no drugs on them, and then they arrest them for obstructing a drug search. Why is it that a court would find them guilty of obstructing a drug search if when they go to court, they're not also charged with possession of drugs? So they've created charges that will ensure that black people will get convicted with little or no evidence, just like they have with the joint enterprise laws. They've created a whole range of processes, structures, and behaviours that need to be challenged. The use of handcuffs on every stop and search, that's absolutely outrageous. And that is treating black people like we're chattel, and it shouldn't be accepted by anybody. That's why we're doing the demonstration on the 12th of September. We're telling the police they need to cease and desist. We're coming out to have our voices heard before we have a George Floyd here. Because we know if we come out after such a death, we know the likelihood of our own neighbourhoods and our own communities getting burnt down. And we don't want that. So this time we're going to bring the struggle to the heart of Babylon, right to Scotland Yard, and tell them they have to cease and desist. The reason behind it is because they think they can do they can do it. They can do it and get away with it. They got Boris Johnson, racist in chief, in power. They've brought all the people who were in London who were responsible for setting up the Matrix, and that's a policing database that captures the name allegedly of London's most violent gangsters, but it actually only captures the names of young black people, all of those people who are responsible for putting that racist process into action, who created it in London and now are in power in government. So they feel empowered and enabled to be able to do this. They've always been racist. Now their racism has been allowed to go unbridled and unchallenged. And we as a community are left with the job of challenging them because nobody else is. Our politicians are not doing it. Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, the man who promised us, who told us that he understood what institutional racism was all about in policing, who promised us that he was going to control the police, that man who is in power and in office now is allowing them and enabling them through MOPAC, the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime, to continue this racist policing strategy.
Do you think there's potential for serious disorder if the racism of the Met is not reined in?
To be quite honest with you, I'm shocked that there hasn't been civil disorder already. I see young people who are ready to take on the police. Every time the police go to lock down one of those unofficial raves, you can see that the young people are angry and that they're actually ready to take on the police. The reason that they're angry and ready to take on the police is in every 100 stop and searches, 80 of those young people are found not to have justifiably been stopped because they haven't broken any law, they have nothing illicit on them, they have committed no crime. So there's a whole heap of anger, frustration and bitterness out there in the community. So absolutely, I think that the ground is fertile and ripe for disorder, disturbance and uprisings and community self-defence happening in future.
So the Commissioner is responsible to the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. What has been his response?
You know, we had I guess you would call it a secret meeting with the Mayor of London, the leader of Haringey Council and the MP for Tottenham, all of them who happen to be black or politically black. At that meeting, the Mayor, the leader of the council and the MP for Tottenham were all willing to talk about institutional racism. Outside of that meeting, they're not willing to say those words. We have a problem with a mayor that would talk to us internally and say one thing and externally and not say the same thing. There is a need for the mayor to live up to the promises that he made us when we elected him mayor in the first place. That is to properly hold them to account. This is the time for the mayor to publicly announce that he has no confidence in the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, because the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police is in denial and wouldn't even consider the possibility that institutional racism is making the police conduct themselves in a way today that is going to impact police-community relationships for decades to come. And I don't think that the Mayor or London can afford that.
So you've published a petition calling for the sacking of Commissioner Cressida, and you're holding a demonstration on the 12th of September outside New Scotland Yard. Tell us more about that.
Well, as we say, the Commissioner's in denial of the potential of institutional racism being at play in some of the decision-making and some of the behaviours of her officers. We think that that's a dangerous position to uphold. We think that by upholding that position, she creates the potential for serious public disorder. And also she sets in train She sets in train the deterioration of a relationship, police-community relationship, that's already at an all-time low. It means that this relationship will deteriorate and the impact will be felt for decades to come. We as a community cannot afford that, and we don't think the police can afford that, and we know that this great city of London cannot afford that police-community relationship to worsen any further.
Okay, so what is actually happening on Saturday? What can people expect?
On Saturday, the 12th of September, we're bringing our sense of outrage to Scotland Yard. We're coming to the heart of Babylon to let them understand that they need to cease and desist, and we won't take it no more. We're coming to have our voices heard. Too often we react to the deaths of one of our community members, and we come out, and as a result, our community burns. We had our demonstration in Tottenham in August. It went off nice and it went off peacefully, and it has encouraged us and emboldened us to bring the demonstration to Scotland Yard itself. We think that the heads of the Metropolitan Police need to hear and see our anger. We think that London needs to hear and see our anger, and we're going to come to Scotland Yard to tell them, cease and desist. We're not waiting for a George Floyd. We don't want a George Floyd, and we're not taking him no more. Enough is enough. Get your knee off of the community's neck.
Well, staff, thanks very much for taking the time to appear on Lee Jasper Drive Time. We hope everybody will circulate the information in relation both to the petition and the demonstration. But for now, Stafford Scott, race equality campaigner, thanks very much for appearing on Lee Jasper Drive Time. Hi, well, it's time for Brixton Analytica, the news segment of the show that delves deep into the cutting-edge stories from around the world. And I'm introducing today a new presenter for Lee Jasper Drive Time, the world-renowned journalist from South London, is Richard Sudan, hugely experienced. I'm delighted he can join us today. Richard, welcome to Lee Jasper Drive Time. It's going to be a permanent feature, so watch this space. What have we got on Brixton Analytica?
Well, listen, Lee, we've got to talk about this. The world is talking about it. The shooting of Jake Blake in Kenosha in Wisconsin in the United States. For those who don't know, Jake Blake was shot 7 times in the back, unarmed, whilst getting into his own car outside of his house. And actually his children were present in the car and witnessed this shooting. And of course, they'll be traumatized for life by witnessing their father be on the receiving end of this. And we've learned now actually that Jake Blake, who was unarmed, is now going to be paralyzed for life. This is a life-changing injury, and so it's really hard to overestimate the impact that this kind of shooting has and will have on Jake Blake and his family, and of course the reverberation of that impact throughout the community and throughout the United States. And of course the latest shooting of an unarmed black man in the United States comes off the back of a number of shootings that we've seen over the summer. Of course the names of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor are on people's lips, but there are so many, Lee, it's actually hard to keep track of those falling victim to both state violence and also white nationalist armed militia.
And we've seen, haven't we, this armed militia element of white nationalists operating as a sort of adjunct to the American police service with complete impunity. In fact, the young man, the 17-year-old, recently shot 2 people, killed them, and injured a 3rd person, and literally walked through police lines completely unchallenged. Absolutely unbelievable. So this association between white nationalist extremists and the police service in America is really concerning.
It's incestuous, and there was actually a report, I believe in 2004, conducted by the FBI, and they acknowledged the growing threats of white militia infiltrating the police force. Of course, you've got things like the Boogaloo movement and the Proud Boy movement. Those are 2 examples of white nationalist groups, and there's plenty of videos online actually of these individuals at different protests around the country, signalling and basically communicating with the police, which has led people to this conclusion that there's collusion between the state and these armed militias. And also one other point here that's critical, Lee, in my view, is that there have been a number of black men that have been found hanging by suicide in the United States in recent months. And in each case, or many of the cases, the death is ruled as a suicide, but many people are saying, look, these are not suicides. These black men have been lynched, as is the precedent in the United States. And actually the reason why these alleged lynchings are being characterized as suicides is again because of this collusion between potentially the coroner's office, the state, and those that carry out these murders. So a very, very serious situation in the United States right now.
And one that will only be resolved if people vote out Donald Trump at the November 2020 elections. I'm not suggesting Biden is the solution to all our problems, but I think that getting rid of Trump, who's the white supremacist in chief in the most powerful bully boy pulpit in the entire world, has got to be key to beginning to dial down the kind of extremist association between white nationalists and the police services, which has the presidential seal of approval.
That is definitely a key aspect. There's no getting away from that. There's been a green light from Donald Trump in the language he's used to basically go after black communities. And of course, Donald Trump did the same with the kind of green light on journalism. So again, you know, I agree with you. I think a lot of people do view the removal of Donald Trump as the first step in beginning to dismantle the system of white supremacy in America. But of course, it goes way beyond that. There's just as many criticisms of the Democrats as there are Republicans. But no doubt, under Donald Trump, the system has exacerbated, and I think now we're in a situation where the situation is going to get worse, because two things need to happen for the situation to stop. Black people need to stop protesting in the United States, but that will not happen until black people are not murdered in the United States. And there's been no indication not only that the state killings are going to cease, actually they've increased or continued certainly after the killing of George Floyd, after the murder and the lynching of Ahmaud Arbery. So the United States is searching for its own conscience right now, and I think it could go any number of ways.
Well, I think that whatever way you look at it, America and black America is in crisis. And the way to resolve that is to make sure they vote Trump out in the November 2020 elections. Because that's going to be the key mechanism in which they can return to some level of normality. But what's your next story?
So we're going to get into now the Home Secretary in the UK shifting tact a little bit. Priti Patel. She put out a tweet.
Or Cruella de Vil, as I like to call her.
She put out a tweet recently, and she basically said she's committed to making the journey for refugees and asylum seekers coming across the English Channel. She's committed to make that journey more perilous, and she actually described the lawyers arguing for the basic human rights of these people as activist lawyers. And of course this is indicative and tells us a lot really about the kind of priority of this dog whistle nationalistic politics which has engulfed the country, and which I think really handed Boris Johnson the keys to number 10. So let's focus on the language for a minute. The word perilous is a specific word designed to appeal to a very specific right-wing base. You know, the right-wingers in this country, they'd love more refugees, frankly, to drown in English Channel, making the often perilous crossing in of itself, and the characterization of human rights lawyers who are trained and qualified, describing them as activist lawyers, really beggars belief. In many ways, it perhaps doesn't tell us anything new, but it does tell us about the government's key priorities going into now this Brexit transitionary period, and of course, you know, the gradual confidence, I think, in Boris Johnson, which will be eroding. They're doing everything they can to make the focus squarely on immigration, migrants, whatever the cost.
Well, it's a typical tactic of a government in distress to throw some racism red meat on the table. This is a government whose ranking competence over COVID, the U-turn Tories, the complete inconsistency, the absolutely appalling performance of Boris Johnson at the recent Prime Minister's Question Time, where Keir Starmer, whatever you think about him, just thoroughly humiliated the man for his inconsistent approach. And it's at times when governments in crisis that they will turn to racism as a means of a distraction strategy. And that's what Priti Patel's doing. She's callous, she's inhumane, she hasn't got the intellect nor the empathy to be a Home Secretary, and her claim or her demand to make this journey more perilous. Where does that go? So you're going to put the Navy on the high seas to start shooting at refugees? How more perilous can it be than it already is?
I mean, this is almost Katie Hopkins style politics. She might as well call migrants cockroaches like Katie Hopkins did. She might as well say that migrants should be gunned down in English Channel like Katie Hopkins did. And a lot of people actually, Lee, are really saying that in some ways Priti Patel might be trying to out Boris. In other words, she's trying to set herself up for a future prime ministerial run. And I think correctly she might have gauged much of the public mood in this country, which is a vindictive, malign, vicious analysis of the plight of migrants and refugees, and actually the reality about what they actually contribute to the society, etc., etc. So dangerous times, I think, in the UK if you're black, brown, a migrant, refugee, or even perceived to be one.
I think the majority of the country are sympathetic to refugees. I think the online commentary is toxic, but I think ordinary folks who live near refugees, who have refugees in their communities, who are their neighbours and their friends and often families, often take a much more inclusive and liberal approach. And we saw the young French migrant die on the beach of Calais in France, and the absolutely toxic response of people online who was celebrating that young boy's death. I don't think that reflects modern Britain. I don't think Priti Patel reflects modern Britain. I think the majority of us would want a humane and compassionate response.
Well, let's hope these more compassionate voices raise their head and regain control of the centre ground. And actually, this isn't particularly something new to the current government. Of course, this is a policy that's continued over many, many years. The funding for Mary Nostrum, the search and rescue facilities in the Mediterranean were cut. So this is like the latest development, really, in a malign, vindictive campaign of rhetoric against migrants and refugees.
Well, it's certainly a Tory vision of Brexit Britain that we don't want. And I'm hoping that the rest of the country will say we don't want that either. So we'll wait and see. Well, what's our final story today?
Well, the Prime Minister of the UK, Boris Johnson, he has said that he believes there's a 30% chance, lo and behold, that Britain is going to crash out of the European Union without a deal. So this has shocked much of the country. Of course, many will be viewing Boris Johnson in a number of ways, but not least he's wasted a lot of time over this summer, Lee.
Well, if it's a shock to many people, then they clearly haven't been watching recent events, because these hard right xenophobic Tories have been praying, engineering a hard right no deal Brexit. That's what they want to do. They want to make it a low wage economy. They want to sweep away the workers' rights protections for people in jobs all over the country. They want to enshrine a new low standard of human rights protections for migrants and refugees. I'm not surprised that Boris Johnson wants to go for this hard Brexit, because it's a free market, libertarian, hard right, wet dream to have such an outcome. It will be absolutely disastrous for this country. And I think that what people have really woken up to the fact that if you elect a clown, much as America has done in Donald Trump, then what you get is not serious politics, but a joke. And Britain has quickly become a joke. U-turn Tories, the amount of racism and hostility to refugees and racism more generally that we've seen unleashed because of their politics, the debacle of Priti Patel, Gavin Williamson on education and exams. Wherever you look in this government, it's just a litany of failure and catastrophe. So Boris Johnson taking us over the cliff for a hard Brexit, that should surprise nobody. But what people should be fearful of is the economic Armageddon that will befall this country. And let's remember this about when economies decline, and we're already suffering a COVID recession. When economies decline, racism always rises.
Well, just on that note, you know, it's no secret that, of course, there are perfectly legitimate arguments for wanting to leave the EU. Anyone in this country knows that the main thrust of the campaign was predicated on a very vindictive anti-immigrant sentiment. And the reality, I think, is that what's going to happen is when the impacts of Brexit are felt, particularly in the north of England, where there are going to be food shortages, medicine shortages, mass unemployment as a new recession is triggered, these communities are likely not going to turn their anger and their vitriol to the political class who caused this crisis. They're going to turn around and they're going to blame migrants once again for the very real crisis that's been created by what many people feel is an out-of-touch, government of millionaires, which really resemble more a kleptocracy than a government, many people feel.
Well, I think you're right, and I think what we're seeing is the sort of Bullingdon Club rule of Brexit Britain, and it's a drunken orgy of excess, racism, misogyny, poverty, and so on. I really fear for people and black people in the United Kingdom as we fall over this Brexit cliff. But that's enough for Brixton Analytica this week. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time on Brixton Analytica. Thanks very much, Richard. Hi, well, that's it for Lee Jasper Drive Time. Hope you've enjoyed the program, and make sure you hit the bell and subscribe so you always find out when we're about to publish a new program on Lee Jasper Drive Time. Until I see you again, take care.